Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us to our second virtual happy hour here for Let's Get Consensual. This April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, which is a big deal for us at Rape Recovery Center. We have a lot of events, and as we talked about in the last session, unfortunately, we had to make some changes to plan, but some changes to our plans. But we are doing, one of the events that we normally do is a Let's Get Consensual bar crawl, where several neighborhoods in the city, several bars in the neighborhood downtown will allow us to come in and give information on one night. And we also do trainings with those bars on bar intervention and consent and sexual violence. But this year, because we can't do that, instead, we are having a virtual happy hour with some of the bars that were going to participate this year. One new one that was going to participate that I was excited for was the post office. I actually have to admit, Mackenzie is our bartender here today, that I'd never been to the post office place.
Man.
Yeah, I was excited.
You gotta come in when we're open again.
Yes, I know, definitely. And so we have Mackenzie here from the post office place. And again, my name is Jorge Barraza. I'm the prevention coordinator at Rape Recovery Center. I do education with schools, businesses, and different community partners on the root causes and prevention of sexual violence. Also, we have with us Megan Asadian, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Megan, and I work alongside Jorge as the outreach coordinator at Rape Recovery Center.
And also, we have Mackenzie from the post office place. We're going to talk a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, of course. So I'm Mackenzie Foster.
I'm making lime juice. Hold on. Oh, sorry. So you don't think, what is he doing over there? I'm actually slicing up some limes.
Just prepping for some drinks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm Mackenzie. I'm a bartender over at Post Office Place. We're located on 16 West Market Street with a sister bar to Takashi, which is right next door. So, yeah, just a regular old Salt Lake cocktail bar.
Yeah, I didn't know that you were associated with Takashi.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, so we started out as a Nikkei bar, Nikkei being a specific type of cuisine, which is Japanese Peruvian fusion. Takashi himself grew up in Japan, moved to Peru when he was younger, and then moved back to Japan. And Nikkei cuisine itself is very specific. There are a lot of, identifying factors of Nikkei cuisine. And then since we've been open for about we're not open right now, but we've been in existence for about 2 years, and we've kind of like departed from Nikkei cuisine specifically, but we do still carry definitely the largest selection of Japanese whiskey in the state, quite possibly the country. I don't know. We have, I think right now, 30 varieties of Japanese whiskey, and then also a lot of varieties of Pisco as well, which is a Peruvian spirit.
I must say, I've never had Japanese whiskey. What makes it Japanese? How different is it?
So back when they were starting to do, whiskey in Japan, there was like one individual, I can't remember his name. They sent him to Scotland, so it's in the Scotch style. There are a lot of, aspects about Japanese whiskey that is in the Scotch style. But I mean, what makes it Japanese is just because of, it being made in Japan.
Oh, wow.
There's a lot of careful attention paid to what kind of water is being used for it. So a lot of the different distilleries are differentiated by the water source. They're really great. They're beautiful spirits, really delicious. And they also have, we have a number of rice whiskeys as well, which is something that they can't sell in Japan. Those are marketed for the US. And those are also whiskey technically, but a lot lighter since it's a rice and not a cereal grain.
Oh, that's fascinating. I did not know that there was such a thing as Japanese whiskey. So there you go. I keep learning, spirit geekery when I do these. Okay, so Also at the post office. So where are you guys located again?
We're on 16 West Market Street.
Okay, and wasn't that a different bar before the post
It
office?
was Christoph's, I think is what it was called,
Okay,
martini
yes. Okay.
bar.
Now I know where it's
Yeah.
at. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So wow, I can't believe
We still get people coming in asking for blue cheese stuffed olives, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't help you. I
Just
could make
add
you
us
a
to the
martini
menu.
though. It might not be the same.
Okay, awesome. So how is do you have any end in sight at this point for opening up? Any time frame for opening up? Have you discussed that yet, or?
So Takashi, our sister, establishment, or I guess mother, I don't know, they were here first, is doing takeout orders right now.
Okay.
So they're partially open right now. I think we're really just waiting to see, one, what the government says, and then two, I don't know, trying to figure out what's feasible.
Yeah.
In my personal opinion, and this isn't anything that the bar has said, because we haven't had extensive talks about it. I know that management is talking about it, and that they're talking to other restaurants and other bars in the area. There's quite an open conversation between business owners locally, trying to figure out what is going on and what's going to happen. So I know that in my mind, it makes more sense to do takeout than to allow, a small handful of people in a night.
Yeah.
People 6 feet apart and all of your servers wearing masks and gloves, because that's, the only other option that the government is proposing. So we'll see what happens, though. Okay. I mean, no definitive yet, but I mean, I think that first and foremost in our management's mind is the safety of not only our patrons, but our employees. And so just making sure that everyone's safe, everyone's healthy, taken care of for now.
That's good to hear that. Yeah, I mean, that's the most important thing. I know it's definitely changed a lot of things. As a matter of fact, for people who are tuning in, Rape Recovery Center actually we still provide all our services. Our hotline's available 24/7 in English and in Spanish, and we have translation for other languages as well. And we also have our advocacy and counseling services available through teleconference. And isn't there some news about the support groups, Megan?
Yeah, so I think our support groups are starting up at the beginning of May. And so not just support groups, but also group therapy. So a wide range of different types of groups as well. And so if you're curious about joining any of those groups, please check out our website at www.raperecoverycenter.org.
Great, thank you. All right, so Mackenzie, what are you gonna teach us how to make today?
Today we're gonna make a cocktail classic called the Gimlet. And if anybody who's tuned in, I can't see if there are viewers right now, so I'm going to pretend that there are.
Yeah.
There are a lot of classic cocktails. If you sub one ingredient, it becomes a different classic cocktail. Right now we're doing a gimlet, which is going to be gin, lime, and simple syrup. If you were to sub the spirit with, say, rum, you'd have a daiquiri. If you were to sub the spirit with whiskey and throw bitters in there, you'd have a lion's tail. There's a lot of things you can do. So if you don't have the ingredients that I have here at home, or if you have lemon juice instead of lime, you can make it work and it'll still be delicious. So yeah, I guess.
So what are the ingredients that you have?
Yeah, so I have gin. I'm using Beehive Jackrabbit gin right now, which is local. I've got lime, which I squeezed fresh, but if you don't have fresh lime, and you have something like this, that also works. It's not going to be as fresh, obviously, because it's bottled, but it'll be very similar. And then I made simple syrup today, which is just a 1-to-1 sugar to water ratio.
So we addressed that a little bit. I made it actually just an hour ago, say my simple syrup. So for those who maybe didn't tune in last time, it really is just boiling equal parts, say 1 cup of water, and once it's hot, just pour in 1 cup of sugar and stir it till it's dissolved. Super simple.
Yep. And if you have like different types of sugar that you want to, do stuff with, I use just regular white sugar. If you have honey, you can do the same ratio and get like a honey simple, which is really nice. Or sometimes if I'm wanting to like mix it up, I have some matcha powder. Ooh. And I'll do matcha, like a teaspoon or a tablespoon, depending on how strong you want the flavor, to every cup of sugar and water. And then you've got a matcha simple that you can throw in, which is really good in a daiquiri. Like a matcha daiquiri is quite
wow.
Nice. That's so cool. Many things that people are doing with matcha nowadays.
Yeah. Just throwing it in anything.
Cool. Okay, so I don't have gin. I have some vodka, tequila, and some whiskey, but I don't have bitter, so the tiger's tail is out. But I can make the same mix with vodka?
Yeah.
Okay. And what would it be called then? Vodka gin?
What was that saying? Yeah.
Okay.
Or come up with a name.
All
Also,
right, great. Even better.
If you've got vodka and you don't have lime and you have lemon juice, you've got a lemon drop there too. So
okay.
Literally, it's like a Mad Libs. It feels like you throw like one thing
Mix
and the other, and you've got one, and then another thing and another, and you've got, it's
okay,
great.
Great.
So yeah, I guess I'll go ahead and.
And is this shaken?
It is shaken. Yeah.
Okay. I have a mason jar because I don't have my shaker with me.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
Mason jar is great. Just pop that top on and it's
I'm
just.
I'm gonna run and grab it real fast, but you continue.
Yeah, I guess now that Jorge is kind of running out, one thing I actually did want to plug really quickly is April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, which is largely why we're doing this series. And I know that Jorge talked about like having to go virtual and things like that, but our theme this month is Our Voices. And so for folks who don't necessarily follow us on Instagram or on Facebook or like know about us, highly recommend following us on Instagram at Rape Recovery Center or on Facebook to kind of stay up to date with our programming and figuring out how to use your voice to contribute to the end of sexual violence in your community. Okay, so you've got your mason jar. Keep going.
Yeah, ready to go.
Excellent. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and, I was mentioning this earlier, Utah state law, you can only have 1.5 ounces of base spirit in your cocktail, but y'all are at home, so y'all can go too. Y'all can go as many as you like. But I'm going to do 1.5 ounces of gin. You just throw that right in your shaker. And then 7.5 of your citrus, lime in this case. And then 7.5 of your simple. And then grab some ice real quick. Throw your ice in that shaker. Smack it to seal it. Or if you have a mason jar, like Jorge, just twist it till it's tight. And then you're going to want to shake until you feel the tin get cold. The primary difference between a shaken and a stirred cocktail is a shaken cocktail will have citrus in it. Stirred cocktails are primarily just liquor and other like aperitif, vermouth, stuff like that. So this changes up like the makeup of the citrus itself. And then shaking it also helps to obviously dilute the cocktail.
I don't have the shaking skills that you do, but.
What was that?
I don't have the shaking skills that you do, but I'll try.
You're gonna be great.
The best
I'm
Tom
not-
Cruise. That's how old I am.
It's kind of interesting. You go to like all the different bars and like you can tell the bartender's specific like shakes. Even in my bar, I can like, I don't know, when it's slow, we'll like practice each other's shakes. It's kind of funny. And then I threw my coupe in the freezer real quick just to get it frosty. I like my drinks super cold. So if you don't care, room temperature is fine. I personally like a chilled glass. And then a strainer if you have it. If not, I'm trying to think of what you could do if you don't have a strainer. I mean, ice is also nice if you just want to keep the ice around.
Yeah.
So strain that in there. And there's a gimlet. I juiced all of my limes, so I don't have a fresh lime to garnish with. I didn't think about that when I was juicing. So this is garnishless right now, but usually a nice lime twist on the end of that, and you've got a perfect drink.
Nice.
So,
Well, let me see here. Well, here's how mine turned out. And I kept the ice in because I don't have a strainer.
it looks lovely.
All right, so cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers, Megan.
Cheers.
Oh man, that's so good.
Wow, yeah. So vodka gimlet?
Yeah.
Okay.
You
Wow,
got
that's
it.
really simple. That's nice.
Super easy. Super easy.
Cool. Well, something else I wanted to talk to you about was, and I mentioned this earlier, that we had that last virtual happy hour with Katie and Michael, owners of Quarters Arcade, and they did a Let's Get Consensual bar intervention training, where we talk about sexual violence, some of the root causes, and also bar intervention. And so they spoke to it, from an owner's perspective, and I was interested to hear, you were staff there at the time when you were at Alibi. We also did the training, who is also one of our partners that we work with closely. And I was wondering, like, what was your take as a bartender taking that training? Because of course management is going to say, this is great, we did this for our employees, but what do the employees think of it?
Personally, I was super jazzed. So first and foremost, very grateful that Alibi let me sit in on that. My boyfriend works at Alibi. Their staff is super great. It was really informative. You learn a lot from, training, your sips and tips or anything like that, things like that. Utah law, you understand. But to get into the nitty gritty and the specifics of this particular area was super helpful. Personally, it made me feel more empowered, especially as a female bartender. And for my bar, who is a predominantly female bar, I think we only have one male employee front of house, and so everyone else it's all female bartenders, it's all female bar backs, door girls, like wow. We're all, it's like a woman powered establishment, and we love it. So being able to, not only for my own self, behind the bar or anything, but to be able to like be in an establishment, have someone come in and be like, hey, if you're here on a first date, I've got you. Like, I'm a woman too. I know what it's like. We've all had our own experiences, and I've got your back. So that was, it was really just like reassuring for me.
Yeah, one of my goals was, as we were doing this, one of our goals was to create that communication between owners and staff as well, and among staff as well. And I think, and I mentioned this during our last virtual hour, that it seems like there was things even happening within the bar that other people weren't aware was going on. I think you were there when the door guy said, like, I get harassed all night, and everyone's like, you do? It's like, so it was good to have that kind of communication and part of our goal. So hopefully, other bars and establishments, restaurants out there, if once things start getting back to normal, if you're interested, please contact us about Let's Get Consensual. We have some great reviews from the owners and the staff that participated last year. But yeah, and another thing that we talked about last time was, the mixing of consents with alcohol, and what does consent look like in a bar? When someone can be very forward. We're talking very, very like situational, very specific situations. But first of all, not everyone goes to the bar, and I think a lot of the work that we can do to reduce sexual violence, not only in the bar but in our community, is also just our attitudes and the culture that we create. A lot of people will resist the idea that we have a rape culture, but unfortunately, as if you sat through almost any of our trainings, 1 in 3 women will experience sexual violence in their lifetime. And as a matter of fact, Megan is really good at talking into, what the statistics are, and what's happening. Would you mind sharing, your perspective on our culture?
Yeah, for sure. Well, there's like a few things that come to mind, but typically when we go into, any space and we're talking about the issue of sexual violence, especially in the state of Utah, I believe the statistic is 1 in 3 women are expected to experience some form of sexual assault in the state of Utah. 1 in 6 men. And we also want to keep in mind with men, like men are probably less likely to report sexual assault. So that statistic might even also be on the lower end. We know that 1 in 2
I can cut in real quick.
Go for it.
That's what was happening at that training, was that it was a male who had never shared his experience of being harassed all night, and it was a common thing.
Yeah.
But I totally got it why he wouldn't say it. He's like, I'm a big burly guy. I mean, what's going to happen?
Right.
But men don't report as much, and I think we need to resist sexual violence, regardless of gender.
Yeah, for sure. And, one of the things, especially when you think about the bar setting, I think a lot of women are vocal about like experiencing harassment in a bar setting. I think every single woman I know who goes out has experienced some type of uncomfortable situation. And I think there's this mindset that like only women get harassed when they're out in the bars, but I actually want to shift that mentality. I do think there's a little bit of that gendered skew in that way, but I also do think like men do get harassed, but they're less likely to report it, right? We don't really encourage boys and men to talk about those types of things. And so that's an important thing to keep in mind as well. Going back to statistics, so we know 1 in 3 women, 1 in 6 men in the state of Utah, 1 in 2 trans-identified folks are expected to experience some form of sexual violence. And that's a national statistic. There is no current statistic in the state of Utah. But really specific to Utah, we rank 9th in the nation in terms of prevalence of rape and sexual assault, which is actually really, really high, because you mentioned this a lot, Jorge. We rank really low in all other types of violent crime compared to the national average, but we actually rank consistently higher in sexual violence and domestic violence compared to the national average. And so,
yeah, as a matter of fact, when it comes to other violent crimes, Utah consistently comes into experiences about half to a third the national average when it comes to burglary, homicide, things like that, except for sexual violence and domestic violence. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing I wanted to add too, you were talking about rape culture. And I think for the most part, folks know what that is, but sometimes people are kind of like, what is rape culture? Like, what do you mean by that? And if we're going to define it, I would say rape culture is like a culture that normalizes and trivializes rape and sexual assault. And I actually want to go beyond that. It normalizes and trivializes rape and sexual assault, but also like sexual harassment, or even like those smaller instances that we see like in the bar scene, right? And so I think a lot of what I see as a woman who knows other women who've gone out into the bars, women are kind of taught to expect some level of harassment, right? To normalize that. And that is part of rape culture, right?
Yeah, when you're talking about having a mostly all-female staff at the post office, so how does that change the dynamic? I'm really curious. I did not know that. So, like you said, like it's your first date, we got you back. I mean, you were in training for Alibi, so you have a pretty good sense of their staff. How would you say it differentiates?
I think it's an energy thing. I think that to compare to Alibi specifically would not be a fair comparison. just because despite the fact that there are a number of like identifying males on their staff, they're still very, very supportive of the women there.
Yeah, and I probably framed that question incorrectly. Yeah, I probably framed that question incorrectly because Alibi is
you're totally
amazing,
fine.
actually. They're really good. I met with Jacob, and he actually told me how the bar layout was thought out so that they could face the entire crowd the entire time. So they're very conscious and proactive about that, which I love. But yeah, continue.
Yeah, no, you're totally fine. I think being a woman, knowing the experiences that I've had and the experiences that my friends and that my sisters and have, I'm more attuned to those things, and trying to nip it in the bud before it happens. I understand like the friendly and fun, motivation behind buying a table of girls shots, and at a certain point when you see the women trying to avoid conversation, you're like, okay, I see where I'm gonna go over and like try and make them more comfortable. Like it's about like I want the people who come in to get a drink from me to feel comfortable and to not feel like they're gonna have to beat someone away or be rude, because I think that that's 100% what goes through a lot of people's heads. I mean, I've been in that situation before where I've been sitting in a bar where someone who's a couple drinks further in from me is like keeps talking to me. I'm clearly working on something and I can't get them to stop, and like I want to just sit and like enjoy a drink by myself. Not everybody goes to a bar to meet people or be social. It's
and that actually touches on something I wanted to talk about, how we can do a lot of this prevention work. You don't have to be in that situation to do that prevention work. You have to recognize that, unfortunately, as much as we would like for this to not be a gendered conversation, the reality is that men get socialized, right, to be aggressive and dominant, and women get socialized to be submissive and pleasing and nurturing. And maybe we don't do it so overtly, but the messaging is always there. And so you tend to be more likely to have a female patron who will put up with more harassment, and a male patron who doesn't recognize that maybe he's stepping over the line a little too far. And that's that socialization that happens. So I think if we really care, and I always say like sexual violence is too big of an issue for us to just root from the sidelines. We all have to be in playing, and doing our part. Challenging some of those attitudes with friends, locker room talk, those kind of things. People are just like, oh, it's harmless talk, but what it's doing, it's reinforcing those gender norms about being aggressive, and also empowering women. As a matter of fact, the CDC has 5 key strategies to ending sexual violence. One of them is engaging men and boys in the fight, and one of them is also empowering young girls and women, because unfortunately, our society does a lot of times do the opposite. It disempowers women and girls. So I think the younger we can start with teaching women, because even me, I work in this field and I catch myself having certain attitudes. I have to check myself. And the same thing happens with my female partners in the office. I mean, it's interesting, and we can laugh about it because we see it happening, and then we work on it. But a lot of times we don't, and we just keep buying into that. So as a female, you're more likely to have experienced, harassment. So when you have an all-female staff, you're gonna have people who are way more aware of the red flags that are coming up. But I think as men, we can learn those too, or any gender can learn that, and catch those red flags sooner.
Yeah, I think that's what's key, is being able to put yourself in a position that if something does happen, you can say, okay, I'm going to one, trust you and trust, I think that's a number one thing, is like if somebody's coming to you with a concern saying, hey, this person's making me feel uncomfortable, to not be like, oh, it's not that big a deal. Like, that's the last thing that you should be saying. Even if it does end up being an innocent mistake or a misunderstanding, to approach it and say, okay, I hear you. Let's see what we can do about it. Let's investigate the situation. Let's see what's going on. Because I would hate to be in that situation to be like, hey, listen, this dude is making me feel really uncomfortable, or this woman is making me feel really uncomfortable. Can you please do something? And then them to be like, oh, the dude has a girlfriend. It's totally fine. Or, oh, it's a woman. Like, it's totally fine. It's just like, it's like taking these assumptions and running with it instead of being like, oh my God, I'm so sorry that you feel uncomfortable. I work here. I'm going to take on the responsibility to help, facilitate a good time for you and to make sure that you feel safe in our establishment, because we want this to be, a place where you can have fun safely,
And that doesn't just apply to a bar setting, obviously, right?
Yeah,
that applies to so many settings. And an interesting thing too is that, and this kind of touches on a very common question, or a frequent question I get is, what do you do when someone discloses sexual violence to you, right? It can be very frightening, and you want to help the person, but it's the same idea of what you're saying. Instead of, you don't discount the person, you say, I believe you, it's not your fault, what can I do to support you, or how can I support you? And it's fascinating. I think when people start recognizing those red flags, you'll find that people start notice that about you. When people are like, oh, this person kind of gets it. As a matter of fact, a great example is, we actually have a partnership with a fraternity at the University of Utah, Beta Theta Pi, and they do a lot of volunteer work. They do galas for us. They do trainings. They do a lot of volunteer work also. And it's gotten to the point where they get a lot of people disclosing sexual violence to them, because they know that Beta Theta Pi gets it. And so it's significant. And I think the more allies and leaders we can get, who can do that.
Well, and when those people look like someone who's a friendly face, it's not easy to go to the police, to go to like an authority. Then, like, I don't know the statistics, but I know that they're high of people not reporting, because it's scary. Because I mean, it's a vulnerable situation. You're putting yourself in a place where someone could say, "Hey, I don't believe you," when there's like a feeling of, violation. And there's also on top of that, a like societal feeling of like, what did you do to bring this upon you? Like, it's already set up against those people to fail, to and to be able to have, one, you guys who are doing such great work and are very like approachable and like kind faces, and very like your outreach is just very genuine and very earnest, to have you guys, and then partners and volunteers and everything, to just be like, hey, we're not a government entity, we're not the police, we're just here to help and to listen, because oftentimes that's just the tip of the iceberg to
exactly. As a matter of fact,
on that journey of recovery from assault or rape, or
or even honestly, domestic violence as well. I actually worked with the Domestic Violence Coalition before working with Rape Recovery Center, and something I've carried over is just a really strong focus on power and control. So abusive relationships are about establishing power and control over a person. And sexual violence is the same thing. It's feeling entitled to have power and control over somebody's body or their autonomy, right? So a person has already lost autonomy in those situations. And the last thing that they really need is somebody else telling them what to do. So whether it's telling someone in an abusive relationship, why don't you leave? Or telling someone who's experienced sexual assault, why don't you report it to the police? You're actually doing the same thing. You're trying to control their actions. And I understand where it comes from. I get that question a lot, like, my girlfriend's going this and I wish you would report. But you have to trust the person who's experiencing that that they will do what they need to do at that moment. They know the situation best. So that's why the key to that, those 3 steps of how to address when someone discloses is, I believe you, it's not your fault, and how can I support you? Not, you should do this. And that's a key difference in approach, because again, disclosing can be very difficult and painful. And if you react the inappropriate way, it may take them longer to open up to somebody else or find resources. Also, speaking of creating that kind of culture or space that allows people to report, this is why I say, like, we all play a part in this. This isn't just one person. We think of sexual violence as something that happens between 2 people or 3 people or whatever, but it's something that we all play a part in. And an example of how societal attitudes and the zeitgeist of what's happening at the moment can really affect a victim, an individual. When the Me Too movement started, 2007, Megan?
Me Too? Hashtag Me Too?
2017, I mean.
Yeah, 17, yeah.
I'm old. I lose decades in my memory. Yeah. So at the Rape Recovery Center, we experienced a huge spike of people calling in from experiences they had decades before. And it was because there was this sense of empowerment. Like, it was empowering to hear that other people have also experienced this. Me too, right? That was a powerful message. And so we've actually maintained really high call volume since then. We've never been the same, which is great. But do you remember the Brett Kavanaugh Supreme Court hearings?
Yes.
And so the allegations, when that was happening, we experienced a dip in phone calls.
Really? Oh, yes. My God.
So this is like national news going on, but it's affecting individuals, because what's going on in our society, our culture, affects when victims can stand up, whether we're listening to victims and believing them, and whether we're holding perpetrators accountable. Those things really matter.
Wow, that's fascinating. I didn't know that. That's interesting that it's like the through line of the nation. You get on a national scale, people not believing someone, and then all of a sudden people are in.
So one person sitting in their apartment in Salt Lake City didn't feel comfortable calling because of what was happening in national news. And so that's what I'm talking about, creating that zeitgeist. Now, can you speak to that a little bit, Megan, as well?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that comes up the most, I did a little bit of direct service work with clients who access services at the Rape Recovery Center. And I think what most folks don't really realize is that, like, there's that significant trauma of the sexual assault or the rape, but then there's also like multiple traumas that occur afterwards. Like, so for example, not being believed, or, reporting to law enforcement and not no justice being served, or not having a lot of community level support. If you come from a tight-knit community that you really rely on and they isolate you, things like that, right? So we call that like a re-traumatization, and that significantly impacts survivors' well-being. And that's actually something that we always have to keep in mind when we are working with our clients at the Rape Recovery Center, is that it's not just that initial trauma, it's like the additional traumas that occur for survivors of rape and sexual assault. And so I think like a huge part of going against that is to start like recognizing those different traumas. Like, rape and sexual assault is bad, and also so is victim blaming, right? Like, and so are all of those really problematic things. And again, this goes back to that conversation about rape culture, about normalizing and trivializing rape and sexual assault. It's so interesting. Like, I think all in some ways have participated in rape culture in some way, because we're all socialized to believe these things, whether that made us, victim blame in, some subconscious way, or we, especially if women decided to dress like a little bit more modestly and shame other women for dressing like not as modestly, or things like that, right? And it's important, I think, to be critical of those norms. at least like begin to challenge them, because that largely impacts survivors who have been sexually assaulted and the likelihood of them asking for help. And I think that also translates to like the bar scene, right? Like I think I've seen multiple instances of women who have been in really uncomfortable situations who didn't report it to either bar staff or police because they didn't like think that they could, right? They just normalized it. Like, this is what happens, right? And that's dangerous. So yeah, that's a huge part of it, is like, we're not going to be normalizing these harm. Not only are we not normalizing sexual violence, like rape and sexual assault, we're also not normalizing like those harmful norms that are attached to that as well.
And the kind of idea that like, oh, it was just this that happened. It's like, I wasn't, you know, physically harmed, I wasn't, you know, robbed, I wasn't, you know, something that the police might take more seriously. I think that that is one of those things as well, that like, I don't have physical proof to say, hey, this is the person that did this to me. And, you know, it's a more difficult thing for people to come forward with, because of that rape culture, because of the, oh, who's gonna believe you? Oh, what were you wearing? Or, you know, all of that.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point too, right? Like, I think when I tell folks that I work for the Rape Recovery Center, people are expecting, and there are like very horrible, terrible situations that involve rape and sexual assault that are just extremely terrible and leave a lot of like physical damage, for example, right? Physical injury. And that happens, and that's horrible. It's horrifying. But also like, there's so much impact from like the things that don't leave like physical harm, right? And that's another thing, like whether that's that re-traumatization I was talking about, of not being believed. I mean, folks don't really put a lot of weight into those types of things as well. And even for folks, like, this is another thing that I think about a lot in the work that I do. The more you do this work, the more critical you are of what contributes to rape culture, the more you start to see like the long-term impact of those like small harmful norms on certain individuals. So whether or not they've experienced sexual assault or sexual harassment or anything, even those norms can still harm folks, right? Like, if we're implementing, like, I always use like the example of dress codes in schools, right? And I'm not saying, if you're watching this and you go to a school that tells you to abide by a certain dress code, I'm not saying don't follow your dress code, but I do think a lot of the messaging that gets perpetuated around that is, you know, it's mostly towards girls and women to cover up, or else they'll distract the boys and men in their class. And again, that's like a harmful norm that like has a long-term impact, right? And so potentially, if somebody is impacted by sexual violence, they might like victim blame themselves because of that long-term like socialization that goes into it. So there's a lot of negative impact on a lot of these things that we consider like small norms, right? But again, that contributes to rape culture. And I think and if anybody wants to really truly end sexual violence, it's more than just speaking out against like rape and sexual assault. It's also challenging those norms.
Oh yeah.
I think sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I think that in the grand scheme of things, I think that people have a general misunderstanding of trauma itself, thinking that trauma is one large crazy event that changes your life forever. But that is traumatic, and that is a trauma. But you have like big T trauma and little T trauma. That's like, yes, these big events did happen, and you can definitely see more clearly how they affected you. But there are these like little, smaller, not little in the sense of like less important, like at all, but like smaller traumatic experiences of, say, a young girl in high school who was, you know, told to go change and to leave the classroom, and everyone in the classroom's laughing at her, and then she thinks that her body is something that's like not, you know, to be shown or not to be like praised or, you know, appreciated by herself, you know. And so I think that it goes back to those, you know, little things that are just re-establishing that this is how things are, and those are really hard to pinpoint and get everybody to see because, you know.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, some of the work that I'm going to be doing over this next year with some great people at Salt Lake School District is reviewing the dress code and saying, like, is this dress code based on unhealthy gender norms, or is it based on practicality, what we actually need? There's ways to have a dress code that's not based on women are sexual objects and men can't control themselves if they see too much skin. I mean, is that the basis for this rule? I mean, if we are, then what are we saying? That boys will be boys, they can't control themselves? You know, and so, yeah, when it comes to prevention, I always also like to say that, you know, prevention is not self-defense classes. It's not even bar intervention, although it's important. Prevention is changing our attitudes and, you know, our culture so that you can walk down the street at any time, day or night, and not have to worry about what am I wearing, or I'm feeling the threat of sexual violence. And you don't get there by only, you know, apprehending rapists. If we caught every rapist and throw them in jail, that's still not going to end sexual violence. What we actually need to do is change the way we think and the way we practice, you know, our gender norms. I would say, like, some people get very turned off by the term toxic masculinity, and I get that, you know, but it's not just about masculinity. It's about, you know, healthy norms that we can have, respecting each other, being empathetic, understanding other people's experience.
Yeah, and I think also, like, the more that I get into this work, because I think when I first started, I had this really gendered perspective of it, right? And like, I definitely agree, like, harmful gender norms and gender socialization significantly plays into it, but then it's also like creating that culture of consent. Like, we don't normalize consent either, right? There's like definitely like a gendered conversation around that as well, but I think, like, in our experience, like Jorge and I, we go to high schools and middle schools and we talk about these things. And what we're really trying to do is is just talk about consent, and like, we're going to teach you what consent is, and more so kind of explore like how folks negotiate consent at their age, and kind of like talk through like the different components of consent that's important. But really, like, what we're finding is a lot of people, it's not always like this black and white thing. There's like a lot of nuance in consent, which I don't think a lot of people recognize when we talk about these things. And a lot of folks don't truly like have a good grasp of consent, right? Especially at that young age when you're starting relationships. And
no, adults as well.
And adults. I should too, right? And I think like that's so fascinating. We like, whenever we go into classrooms, we try to ask folks, when was the first time you learned about consent? And in a sexual context, a lot of folks learn it either from our workshops in high schools, or I know for me, I heard about consent and the importance of it my freshman year of college, which is way too late, right? And there's something really important that Jorge says, because he's like the prevention guru at the Rape Recovery Center, but he's always saying like consent should always, like, you know, what is the quote? I can't say it as well as you. Consent is a life skill that should be way before it becomes about sex, right? Like, consent is something that we should normalize starting from a super, super young age, right? Like, and I think this is like another thing that kind of loops like parents in, like, how can you empower your kids to advocate for their you know, boundaries and practice consent at a young age? But like, I know that, for example, when I was a little girl, I had family members that would say like, go hug your aunt or your grandmother, or else you're telling her that you don't love her, right? And so those things don't seem necessarily super harmful in the moment, but they do have, again, that long-term impact. And there's so many like different harmful norms that contribute to not having a consent culture. Like, we don't fully, and I think this makes a lot of people uncomfortable when I say this, but bear with me, I don't think like society at large has a good grasp of consent. And I think there's a reason for that. Like, we're not normalizing consent, but also like consent can be tricky, right? Like, we're not taught, like when we're taught about relationships, we're not taught to like learn how to communicate with our partners or our friends or family. about consent, right? Like we're not taught about those different things. And so for a lot of folks, it feels really, really uncomfortable. And that's actually something that Jorge and I love to explore when we go into like junior highs and high schools, and also with adults too. I think it's like interesting with like youth because they tend to be like a little bit, in my experience, more candid about like different scenarios, like what if we're on a first date with this person and different things like that. It always generates really good conversations, but like you start to kind of see that like folks really like don't have that practice, right? They don't know what that necessarily looks like when they're negotiating it. And again, like when it goes to consent and talking about those types of things, it's not always with a romantic partner. It also applies with your friends, with your family members, with, you know, a random person that's, you know, taking tracks with you or something like that, right? So that's just like something that like we're also trying to explore in our education work. And I definitely think that translates into the bar scene as well. Like, especially with alcohol,
sure.
it just gets a little tricky, right?
Exactly. And that's why I think we need to practice it outside that situation, right? Because once you put in alcohol, if you haven't thought about these things beforehand and understand, you know, what are my values, what am I okay with, what am I not okay with, you add alcohol and it's going to be a mess.
Mm-hmm.
So you were talking about how we don't normalize healthy consent. And you're right. Like, how many people learn about consent and talking to your sexual partners about consent from their parents? I mean, almost nobody does, right? So then where do youth get the messages? From the media. And how often do you see in media somebody say like, hey, I want to do this with you, or I want to do that with you? Never. I always bring that example up. It's always the guy is a little aggressive, the music swells, right? He goes in for the move. She might hesitate a little, but he's persistent. She gives in and she ends up enjoying it. Like, so
or if he doesn't, it's an absolute rejection. He feels terrible. And then it's this whole, like, you're making someone feel bad.
Yeah.
This is on you. Yeah.
I got to tell you, whether it's youth or adults, whenever I ask, why don't you verbally ask for consent before a kiss? The answer I get most commonly from, again, adults or kids is like, I don't know, it's weird. It kind of kills the moment. I'm like, I challenge you to do it. It does not, I promise. If the moment was right, it was going to be right anyways.
Well, and then the follow-up question that Jorge also asks is like, well, what if you tried to kiss somebody without asking them and they didn't want to be kissed? Wouldn't that also ruin the moment?
Yeah.
Interesting, right?
That's one of those things that it's like, it's better to be, in general, with many things, it's better to be safe than sorry.
Yep.
And also, you can never go wrong with, like, I would rather to like over communicate than to under communicate and vastly misread a situation and end up either in like a situation that I didn't want to be in, or you know, making a mistake or making someone feel uncomfortable. You know, I think that people are, I don't know if it's an American thing.
I don't think it is. I don't think it's a
human
uniquely
thing.
American thing.
It's a worldwide thing.
Yeah.
Not communication. No, I think that there are a lot of factors that go into it. It's a lot of like decades and centuries of just, you know, nailing in the same ideas. And then now we have media, which there's a lot of media today that does a lot of good as far as like trying to talk against those things. But you have the, you know, reaffirming those sort of ideals through media. I went to school for acting, so I'm an actor, and that's something that when I look at like roles or, you know, sides that I'm getting, self-tapes that I'm sending out, I'm like, all right, what is this saying? Because at a certain point, like when you're behind the bar, you have an obligation to, you know, behave a certain way, to, you know, make sure there's safety for your patrons. When you're an actor, you have a responsibility to make sure that this piece of media that's going to be consumed by thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions, I'm certainly not there, but I mean, you're sending a message literally through words and pictures, and you want to make sure that you're using your voice responsibly and not sending like a bad message.
And, you know, I got to say, things have changed. You know, they have gotten better.
Yeah.
There's still a long way to go. Obviously, again, I actually have seen a handful of examples of healthy, very direct verbal consent in a couple of shows and movies, but there's still, the rare occasion. So, I mean, our time is just about up. That went kind of quick, but if anything, one thing I do want to leave you with a challenge to everyone who watches is like, try verbal consent. It is hot. It really is.
It can be for sure, right? And
Yep.
the last thing too that I'll add to that is like, you do have to recognize consent takes a level of vulnerability, right? Like practicing that. And so like, as long as you can recognize that, that's just like another way to build an even more meaningful connection with somebody. And so again, not just in a romantic context, but just in your life in general. So definitely practice consent. It's really, really important.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Mackenzie, for joining us. It's been fun, and it's delicious. Thank you. And yeah, so we look forward to working with the Post Office Place as again in the future. Me and Megan just love doing the bar crawl and working with our partners out there. So
I'm so glad that we could still, or that you guys are still doing something in place now that everybody's in place.
Yeah.
It's nice. It's nice.
Yeah, very much. And and so everyone, keep an eye out, and support the Post Office Place when they come back up. And also, again, for the Recovery Center, our services are still here. I'm terrible at memorizing phone numbers. Do you know the phone number?
I know the phone numbers. If you are curious about accessing services, or you want to call and schedule an intake appointment, feel free to call our office line at 801-467-7282, Monday through Thursday from 9 to 5. If you need after hours support, you can contact us through our crisis line, which is 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, at 801-467-7273. You can press 1 for an English speaking Spanish, or English, oh my goodness. I almost had that spiel down. You can press 1 for an English speaking advocate, 2 for a Spanish speaking advocate, or you can request an interpreter in over 150 different languages. And so definitely access those resources if you need some support.
Yeah, and another thing that we do, a lot of people don't know, is that we do education and outreach. And even during this time, we're doing projects. We can do webinars like this for your organization, your groups, to talk about sexual violence and how to create healthier communities. So thank you once again, everyone, for joining us, and thank you, Megan and Mackenzie, and look forward to seeing you guys in real life at some point soon.
Maybe we can all get drinks together and continue.
Yeah. All right.
I would love that.
Yeah.
Cool.
Bye.
All right, bye, y'all.
Bye.